What's up, everyone? Chris Yandel here for Channelfireball.com, and welcome to another edition of Audio Articles, where we bring you articles written by the top Magic the Gathering pros in audio form, so you can listen on the go wherever and whenever you want for free, Monday through Friday. We've also got a lot of really great content on YouTube, so make sure you head over to YouTube, search for Channel Fireball, and ring the bell next to the subscribe button. And if you're trying to make it easier to listen to the podcast, if you have an iPhone, ask Siri to play the most recent episode of Channel Fireball's podcast, and it'll start. We're also on Spotify and iTunes. Today's episode is written by Luis Scott Vargas. Luis is going to talk about a sick beta draft that he did in GP Vegas and give you some other shenanigans that happened along the way. Thanks for being with us today, and here is Open Beta, a Grand Prix Las Vegas tournament report by Luis Scott Vargas. Hey Eric, there's a shot that I can make the beta draft. Would it be possible to be added to the beta qualifier number 3, which I may or may not have a chance to play in? This ended up being one of the more fateful emails I've ever sent. On Wednesday, I realized that I was going to be able to play in one beta draft qualifier, so I emailed Channel Fireball marketing czar and chief enforcer Eric Raging Levine. Luckily, he was able to squeeze me in, and my journey toward the beta draft began. The Grand Prix in Las Vegas each year is always quite the experience, and this one was no exception. There were a million things to do, both inside the venue and out, and the headliner for this one was the beta draft. 8 lucky winners of a Dominaria sealed plus draft event would get seats at the table, and I figured that I'd take my shot at being one of them. I was also bringing a sweet old school deck, which is the format I prepared the most for coming in. See, I wasn't even going to go to Vegas to play. I was slated to do coverage alongside Gabby Spartz in one of our rare appearances in the booth. The Thursday side events were just that, and I expected to be done battling once Thursday concluded. Leading up to the event, I worked on our old school deck, which was in fact the deck. It may sound funny to tune a deck for a format that hasn't rotated since inception. More on this format can be found in a link in this article. But Brian Wiseman and I managed to make some good changes to the control deck we planned on playing. Brian came up with the idea to add Hymn to Torok to the deck for control mirrors, and it was awesome. Where most people sideboarded in Red Elemental Blast, we boarded in Hymns, and it was a bloodbath. For a picture of Luis's deck list, head over to channelfireball.com. Obviously, half the fun of old school is playing with sweet cards, so posting a picture of the deck list is mandatory. In fact, old school deck lists are posted via photo, not list, which adds a really awesome feel to the format. I won a glorious 1-0 in the event before being pulled away, and since I wasn't sure if I was going to make it back, I wasn't dropped. I then got paired against quite the pair of misers, both of whom were more than happy to tweet about their quote-unquote victory. Randy Bueller and Tom Martell. I'll have you know, Martell and I played out our match later, sideboard and all, and I handedly crushed him. Take that, Tom. Thursday Beta Draft Qualifier. Next up was the Beta Draft Qualifier. 5 rounds of sealed, followed by a draft, winner take all. In fact, one loss anywhere was elimination, so I went in with no expectations. My sealed had a lot of great removal, but the last few cards were mediocre. Having to play 2/2s for 2 and fire elementals with no abilities wasn't where I wanted to be, even if I did have History of Benalia, Benalish Marshal, Fight with Fire, and a few good removal spells. This is approximately what I had, since the deck got lost in the shuffle. For lands, 10 plains and 7 mountains. For creatures, Benalish Honor Guard, Benalish Knight, Valduk Keeper of the Flame, Keldon Warcaller, Fire Elemental, Aven Sentry, Keldon Raider, Rampaging Cyclops, Sarah Angel, 2 Gitu Chronicler, Benalish Marshal, Easter Glider. And for spells, Haphazard Bombardment, History of Benalia, 2 Shivan Fire, Fiery Intervention, Fight with Fire, Blessed Light, Seal Away, Jousting Lance, and Short Sword. Shahar Shenhar correctly advised me to just cut the 1 Easter Glider for a plains each round, so I did that. I managed to go 4-0 before drawing, with a few notable incidents along the way. Haphazard Bombardment hit a Verdant Force on the first shot. Look, I didn't put that card in my deck not to hit their 8-drop. Apparently, one of my opponents was not pleased with my lack of sleeves. According to one of my later opponents, my prior opponent complained to the judges after I left about it, and was asking if it was legal to play without sleeves. Is it legal? Magic was played without sleeves for years, and I hate sleeving. This is a ridiculous line of inquiry, and I wish my opponent had brought it up while I was there, so I could mock it in person. Some games I went Benalish Honor Guard into History of Benalia, and some games I went double Shivan Fire into Gitu Chronicler into Fight with Fire. Gotta have a range. I was supposed to record Magic TV with my sidekick Mashi and my esteemed editor-in-chief Andy Cooperfaus, and after I opened my sealed, I texted Mashi that I'd be out of the tournament soon. Whoops. I made it into the top 8 as a 6th seed and got ready for one of the biggest drafts of my life. Winner got fame, riches, and an invite to one of the best events ever held. 2nd through 8th got some prize wall tickets. Things started pretty well as I opened Lyra Dawnbringer. Ding! And both black and white seemed quite open. The toughest pick of the draft was Kwende against the Eldest Reborn, when I had the following relevant cards: Lyra Dawnbringer, Cast Down, Knight of Malice, Jousting Lance, Arvad the Cursed, and Davenant Trapper. Normally, I'd just slam Reborn, but the combination of Lance, Knight, and Avrad made me lean towards Kwende. My deck had a bunch of first strikers and was medium aggressive, so I thought the payoff was enough. After getting past Urza's Ruinous Blast in Pack 3, I was pretty glad I made the pick, though it could still easily be wrong. My first 2 matches were uneventful. I beat Zach, a friend of a friend, after he mulliganed and got pretty flooded, then dispatched a very pleasant fellow playing red-black with also medium draws. The finals was a tense affair, and I could tell that my opponent was pretty nervous. I lost Game 1 in short order to an army of Saprolings, and won Game 2 equally easily on the back of removal plus beaters. I did get to make a play in Game 2 that I believe ultimately won me Game 3, and that shows off the psychological aspect of Magic. There is something to be said for playing in person, and I took full advantage of it in this match. In Game 2, my opponent attacked with Spore Crown Thallid, which was amazing in his deck, into an empty board. I snapped it off with Fungal Infection, and even remarked how good that was for me. My opponent didn't seem happy with the exchange, and I thought there was a good chance that he'd avoid attacking into Fungal Infection in Game 3. Lo and behold, in Game 3 he didn't attack with Spore Crown into my board of all swamps, preferring to let his Saprolings do the dirty work. I was stuck without planes for a long time, and when I finally started drawing white lands, I was really far behind. He still never sent in that Spore Crown, and I still kept taking 6 to 8 a turn off of Saprolings, past the point where I would cast Infection. I did think a little each turn, because I figured I might as well sell it a small amount. It all culminated in the following board. Me, 6 life, a Lyra Dawnbringer, and an untapped Swamp. My opponent, 3 2/2 Saprolings, a 6/6 Shauna, and a Spore Crown Thallid. I was sitting there, all my hopes and dreams on drafting beta crushed. I had already begun composing the complaint tweet mentally, and wouldn't even be able to scratch the surface of how disappointed I was to come so close. In the midst of all this, I heard the best thing I could imagine. Go. My opponent, fearing what would have been an insane blowout, didn't attack into Fungal Infection. Granted, I would have won on the spot if I had had it, as I would have eaten Shauna with Lyra, chumped to 2/2, and gone to 5. At that point, Lyra versus some 2/2s wouldn't have been close, and since I'd just drawn my second planes, presumably, I was going to deploy more things. But I didn't have Infection, and my opponent passing was the payoff for selling how good it was in Game 2. I untapped as fast as I could, slammed Urza's Ruinous Blast, and that was all she wrote. The entire Serpent Squad was watching. Gabby had a stream meetup, and her stream team is the Viper Brood, an elite subsection of which is the Serpent Squad, and we rejoiced for about 2 minutes, after which I had to literally run to film Magic TV, as I was 6 hours late and an entire set was waiting. Luckily, we had some excellent guests that were able to cover for most of my time missing, and I want to thank Jerry T, Brian, the real BK Kibler, Ben TBS Sec, Reed the Bones Duke, Tom Martell, and Brian Wiseman, plus anyone I may have forgotten. Mashi was a trooper, as were all of the film crew, and we got some awesome content I can't wait to release. Also, I was in the beta draft. It's hard to overstate how excited I was. I was giddy the entire rest of the weekend, and all I could think about were Shivans and Moxen and Fireballs and Pestilences and Ironfoot Treefolk and more. I just love old cards, and I love playing old, janky formats. I made the finals of an unlimited through Saga Rochester draft at Gen Con last year, and have spent a way above average amount of time playing unconventional limited formats. I also spent a lot of time pursuing and acquiring old cards, so I was ready for the know the prices part of the format. I honestly think I may be the best player in the world for formats like these, given zero preparation time. I've been training for this for years for no actual reason, and my body was almost ready. Plus, this is the only chance I have to be able to plausibly claim that there's a limited format I know better than Ben S. or Huey, so I'm just going to go for it. Speaking of Ben S., he also qualified, as did Martin Yuza. I was really happy to have 2 teammates make it, as it somewhat made up for our lackluster, putting it mildly, performance at Pro Tour Dominaria. They had to do a crash course on beta drafting, as the format has some really weird things going on. I knew they needed help when Martin opened with, "Can't we just pick 2 open colors and draft a good curve?" Yeah, that's not how it works. The average beta Rochester draft is going to have the following characteristics. Number 1, there's going to be 19 to 21 land, with 20 being average. Martin's had 23. Number 2, 3 colors with outs to a fourth. I main deck 3 and sided into the fourth. Number 3, no fixing besides Celestial Prism. If you thought Navigator's Compass was bad, get a load of this. Number 4, 11 creatures, 8 of which have 2 or fewer power. And number 5, 3 to 5 cards that actually matter and will determine most of the games. Beta is a format defined by your top end, so opening a Fireball, Singer Vampire, or Pestilence matters way more than whatever your average creature is or what you took 5th. I had some nice resources at my disposal too, in the form of the esteemed Brian Wiseman, who is quickly becoming one of my favorite people to talk to, and is someone whose work I thought was way cool before I even played a single tournament. He's the one that invented the deck. Brian has done a ton of 4th edition drafts, which are functionally identical to beta, minus the power, which honestly is just a reward for being an incredible luck sack. Ben S. and Martin. He advocated avoiding white and blue at all costs, as they just didn't have any stats worth mentioning at common and barely any at uncommon. He even went so far as to say that Hill Giant was better than Sarah Angel Pick 1 Pack 1, which is a bold claim. I wasn't sure if I was going to make that pick, but getting an in-depth beta limited review from Brian was very helpful. Of course, I had 3 days of coverage before the beta draft, but the amount of space I devoted to talking about the draft does reflect how excited I was about it. So I'll just give you the coverage highlights, which is usually what I do when I report on coverage. The view from the booth doesn't lend itself to quite the depth you get from playing. Friday and Saturday, Modern. I was paired with Gabby, which is awesome, and we battled our way through 3 days of Modern, Sealed, and for Gabby, beta draft. Here are some of the standouts. Number 1, Mark Calderero, the showrunner, delivering an awesome rant because one of the deck lists we were missing was someone who got featured, and it looked like they were on Lantern Control, which we avoid like the plague. Luckily, they were actually on a sweet Tezzeret Thopter deck. Crisis averted. Number 2, a Sea of Humanity. There weren't actually Infinite Humans decks in the tournament, but many high-profile players were on the deck, and we spiked a lot of mirrors. Explaining that whoever draws more Thalia's Lieutenants is probably going to win is not the most enthralling part of the coverage. And number 3, Modern is about as tilted away from fair decks as it's ever been. Between Hollow One and Bogles trying to cheese you out, Humans assembling a ton of power while disrupting all spells, and KCI doing God knows what over there, it's just not the time and place to be trying to jun people out. Decks I consider reasonable choices right now. Number 1, Tron. As loath as I am to admit it, Tron is fast enough to compete, and it's doing just the right level of broken. Number 2, Hollow One. Number 3, KCI, if you really truly have practiced enough, and you know who you are. Number 4, Humans. This deck truly is great. It's fast, powerful, disruptive, and nigh unbeatable when it draws Aether Vial and 2 lands. And number 5, Mardu Pyromancer. The one fair deck I think is playable, despite my normal disdain for non-blue control. It gets to play Unconditional Disruption and Thoughtseize, and has Blood Moon, plus makes enough tokens to play offense or defense effectively. Decks that I would avoid. Number 1, Jeskai Control. If you peg the metagame right, this deck is great. Get your answers wrong, and it's quite bad. This has the potential to be good, but really relies on your predictive powers. Number 2, Burn. I just don't think this deck is fast enough. Modern is very fast right now, and people seem to respect Burn enough that it's not the best choice. Number 3, Affinity. Not only is this a worse KCI, I don't even think it's that amazing against some of the reactive decks. Life got harder for Affinity once Kolaghan's Command got printed. And number 4, Storm. The most popular deck in the format plays 4 Meddling Mage, 3 Thalia, 4 Kitesail Freebooter, and 4 Phantasmal Image. Ugh. Decks I didn't mention. Your favorite deck. Matt Nass going off with KCI left Gabby and I racing to explain what exactly it was that the viewers were watching. I thought we did a passable job, but wow, that deck is hard to commentate on and play. If more people played that deck at Matt Nass's level, or even Andrew Beckstrom's, it might be a real problem for Modern Balance. Congrats to Matt Nass for taking down another GP. He's on a tear, and finally may have turned the corner from being underrated and run flat out into being overrated. It's hard to make that big a swing, but I think that Matt has managed. And for the record, I think Matt is great. After taking Vegas for all it was worth at the blackjack tables, i.e. losing a tolerable amount, we got ready to cover Limited, and in my case, to crack open the packs of beta I've been dreaming about. Sunday. Any drafts? We kicked off Sunday with a bunch of drafts, followed by more drafts, followed by the draft. I love covering drafts. and I think they are among the most interesting and compelling part of coverage. Sadly, limited matches tend not to be of the same interest level, and I've always wondered if we should just show all drafts with one round of each deck instead of sticking to the normal formula of covering each round, often with players we didn't get to see draft. The drafts we watched were particularly interesting. Normally, once the player is settled in, it's not all that hard to figure out where they're headed. The first 4 or 5 picks are close, then they settle into blue-white or whatever, and it's smooth sailing. Not so for our heroes. We covered Alexander Hayne and Haoshan Huang, and at the end of both of their drafts, I couldn't predict which colors they were. Hayne was certainly something Jundy and ended up red-black with a little bit of green, with Huang being straight Mardu. Sometimes drafts don't come easy, and those tend to be the more interesting to watch. There's also a lot of really good lessons to be learned. For a close look at a couple of the drafts from Grand Prix Vegas, head over to this article and check out the video. The first draft in the article highlights a common decision tree, and Gabby and I walk viewers through it during the draft. In some seats, it's hard to figure out exactly what your colors are, and Emmanuel was not faced with easy decisions as a result. But he ended up falling into a trap that I've fallen into many times, and hopefully you can avoid. He ended up waffling too much on which colors were his primary, and as a result was something closer to straight Abzan than any 2-color combination, which you should strive to avoid. You can see how it happens in the video, but here are the steps broken down. Number 1, early in the draft, you see cards of 3 different colors and cards that work together reasonably well. In this draft, that was white, black, and green, all with minor token themes. Number 2, picks alternate in an unfortunate way where you see all 3 colors in nearly equal proportion. So every time you think you're out of a color, a late card pulls you back in. Number 3, you figure that you should keep taking the best card and settle on colors later. It then quickly becomes later. And number 4, you have to commit and just stick to 2 colors, potentially splashing the third, and stand by the decision. Heading into pack 3, that's when you just need to make your best guess as to which 2 colors are the best for you and go hard on those. The last step is the one that didn't happen in the draft we covered. A pick of Shana was followed by Seal Away, which I thought cemented the draft into green-white, but then Deathbloom Thallid got taken over Gideon's Reproach, and Abzan was back on the menu. There are cards I'd splash, and there are cards I wouldn't. And if your deck ends up with Fungal Infection, Sergeant at Arms, and Yavimaya Safford, it's hard to call it a success. Bear in mind that this was a tricky draft, and even though it does serve as a good example for this point, I have to give Emmanuel credit for having a great record to even be featured, and don't envy having to navigate the seat he was given. You, beta draft, now. Finally, after much ado, here was the event that I, and about 80% of Twitch chat, was waiting for. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to crack 24 packs of beta, and an experience so overwhelmingly awesome that I'm sad I won't get to go to Gen Con because it conflicts with the Team Pro Tour. There's another beta draft being held at Gen Con. For a video of the full beta Rochester draft, head over to Channelfireball and click on this article. The actual draft starts about 12 minutes in and involves my first round opponent slamming Fireball, which was not how I wanted to kick things off. Before we get to that, let me explain a little about Rochester draft, which I know isn't relevant to anyone, but I feel like I fulfilled the strategy part of my article with some of the above sections. Plus, if any of your friends are smart enough to qualify for the beta draft at Gen Con, point them here and I bet it'll help. Rochester draft is face-up draft, where 1 pack is opened at a time, and players pick 1 by 1 until it hits the player next to the person who opened the pack. At that point, it wheels, and they pick again, and the picks loop back towards whoever opened. Some notes about Rochester strategy. Number 1, you know your first round opponent, so keeping track of what they're up to is critical. This is where I got a huge edge on my first opponent. Number 2, reading signals is trivial when picks are face up, but you still have to decide when to fight neighbors for colors, as it's worth it when you're getting something powerful enough. Number 3, beta in particular has huge deltas between the good cards and the average ones, so I expected a ton of fighting. Number 4, I also expected a ton of rare drafting. Random beta rares are worth hundreds, and good ones are worth truly obscene amounts. I myself didn't really want a rare draft all that much. I did take a fast bond, but I also passed rares for better commons and uncommons, and made picks like Disintegrate over Lightning Bolt, a pretty big monetary gap, and a likewise large power level gap in Limited. Number 5, color hoses, like Circles of Protection, and Life Force are insane in beta, and knowing what your opponent's colors were and what answers they had was paramount. Number 6, when you're close to the wheel, you can take worse cards over better ones if you think the next few people aren't in those colors. Taking a decent green card over a good red one is smart if the 2 next people aren't in red, but one is in green. And number 7, Remembering as much as you can about what all the players at the table took is really helpful, both in the draft and later in the matches. It's also really challenging if you haven't done it before, and almost nobody has played Rochester at this point. I used to jam a bunch before I got on the Pro Tour, and had done one as recently as August. I was ready. My deck ended up being quite nice. I opened a Navinral's Disc, a Disintegrate, and was in a good seat for red-green, two of the colors I really wanted to be in. Unfortunately, my opponent, Scalding Hot Soup, had what was shaping up to be a monster. Not only did he open Fireball and Earthquake, the two players passing to him were aggressively rare drafting. Can I complain about how lucky Ben S is again? That led to him having the best deck at the table, straight red-green with all good creatures, count 'em, 3 Fireballs, and Earthquake. I had my work cut out for me. Luckily, this is where my experience with these loose formats came to bear. I literally drafted circles around him as I snapped up Circle of Protection Red and Circle of Protection Green. I also kept a close eye on any Tranquilities or Disenchants headed in his direction and was satisfied when he didn't take any. I had a plan. My draft went pretty well otherwise. I did end up in 3 colors with 20 lands, but I had 2 X-Spells and a Disc, plus high creature quality. Dragon Whelp was a gift and is one of the better finishers in the format. I even got to assemble Orcish Artillery plus COP Red, which is a throwback if I've ever seen one. Between that and the Disc plus Wall of Brambles combo, I was really doing it. I didn't bring Beta Lance to the tournament because I wasn't anticipating playing, but luckily, a limited resources listener had them. Thanks again to Josh for the timely loan. I needed Beta Lance to play the beta draft more than you may know. The games. My first match was insanely close, with me surviving Game 1 on the back of Guardian Angel for his lethal Fireball, losing Game 2 despite COP Red because he fireballed all of my creatures, and winning Game 3 after getting both circles in play. He had no outs at that point, and was helpless to my eventual lethal Disintegrate. Ah, the dark side of beta draft. Rather, one of many. You can find a link in this article where his opponent also wrote up the match and draft. My second round was much less challenging, as I was facing Hall of Famer Martin Musa. His 23-land, 1-drop aggro deck folded to my COP Red and my sideboard Prodigal Sorcerers. That put me into the finals against longtime player and former WoW TCG pro Tim Rivera, who I actually played at my very first Grand Prix, Anaheim 2003 for those who were wondering, and there's even a link to a very belated tournament report in this article. Going into the draft, I knew Tim was a huge threat. He's a skilled player who's been playing forever and knows all about formats like this. I expected him to have a great deck, and he ended up with a monster. At the end of the draft, I would rank Scalding Hot Soup, or Ian if you want to use his actual name, first, Tim second, and myself third. Tim had 2 copies of Pestilence, Terror, Singer Vampire, and a bunch of good creatures. Luckily, we agreed to split the prizes and play for the glory, so I didn't feel nearly as bad as if I'd got trounced to walk away with nothing. He did dispatch me, though it took 3 games, and in the end, the better deck had to win some of the time. Phew! This report was about as long as our weekend was, so I don't feel bad ending it here. Of course, after losing the finals of the draft, I then went back to help my poor suffering coverage colleagues break down the set. I felt horrible for bailing on the last 3 hours of coverage, but the beta draft was just too unique for me to ever pass on it. We got out at about midnight, at which point Gabby, Andy Cooperfaus, and I met up with an extremely loose Paul Cheon. He does make an appearance, and his partner in crime, Kevin Chu, at which point we Vegased it up until about 4 a.m. We ended up ahead enough to feel quite happy, which was a nice conclusion to the weekend. Luis also got trolled by a friend of a friend, as you can see in a picture on Twitter, where he had a whole bunch of prize tickets and the prize wall was about to close, so he had him go buy whatever he wanted, and the guy came back with a ton of merfolk tricksters. Okay, now I'm really calling it. Before we go, here are some props and slops, because this is a throwback report. Props. Number 1, Gabby, for literally holding down the booth solo while I ran to go to the beta draft. Gabby doing solo coverage of a format she's never seen before is literally a nightmare she's had about coverage, so her trucking through it is worthy praise. Number 2, Rich Hagen, for dealing with much the same and covering for me when I was unable to resist trying and succeeding to qualify for the beta draft. He also opened a Black Lotus on stream, which I can assure I thought was really funny. Yeah. Number 3, BDM, for being the perfect person to cover said draft. It's only right that the Pro Tour historian be involved, and he too picked up some of my slack. Number 4, Paul Rietzel, for being by far the best Paul on coverage that weekend. Really, great job, Paul. Number 5, Tom Martell, for battling old school and hopping into the booth when we needed him. Maybe Tom has the fire again, and we might be seeing more of him on the tournament scene. Number 6, Andy Cooperfaus, for putting up with my nonsense on coverage and on Channelfireball, and being a great guy to gamble with / absorb bad cards at blackjack. Number 7, Josh for the Beta Lands hookup. Number 8, Liz Lamfero for her vigilance in making sure all the precious Beta Alpha product was safe and delivered for the draft. Number 9, Eric Levine for head judging a challenging draft and opening the packs such that all the cards came out minty fresh. For a guy called Raging Levine, he had a gentle touch. And number 10, Uric for bringing Gabby and I an awesome breakfast on Friday. It really hit the spot. Slops. Number 1, Matt Nass for making people think that they should take KCI to a tournament, therefore making themselves and their opponents suffer. Number 2, Pat Cox for losing win-ins in both GPs. You're killing me, man. Number 3, Andrew Beckstrom for obvious reasons. Number 4, Paul Cheon for only doing one day of coverage. We didn't get to hang out nearly as much as I wanted to. Number 5, Raptor for not coming to Vegas. What the hell, man? Number 6, Uric for losing in the top 8 of his beta draft qualifier. That would have been awesome. And number 7, me for any and all looseness that weekend. It was an overwhelming weekend, and I punted plenty of times, both in-game and out. That does it for this episode of Audio Articles. Make sure to head over to channelfireball.com and leave Luis a comment about what you thought about today's article. Or you can hit him up on Twitter at LSV. He also streams under the same name. Also, make sure to check out cfbevents.com. You'll find all the information about the upcoming GPs there. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for being with us today, and I hope to see you soon. And until then, peace.